a hillside. These are cities of 40, 50, 60, 70,000 people. They're built over water, aquifers. They're built at key junctions. They're built on certain hilltops. They're built to control movement. They're built to control the border. I mean, every settlement has its rationale.
We can see from here the village. It extended toward the settlement of Ariel, which is located above the hill over there. Ariel, located in the heart of the West Bank, which means 25 kilometers to the east of the Green Line. There is a very important aquifer located on the underground under this area, which the Israelis are stealing. They are enjoying the water. They are irrigating the gardens and washing their cars and playing with the dogs with water. And here we are suffering the shortage of water.
Per capita, Israelis use about 6 or 7 times the amount of water that Palestinians use. And many times in the summer months, Palestinians do not get water, even though it's their water that's being pumped out by the Israelis and sold back to them. They don't get sufficient supplies.
The cut of water in summer means that we will be without water for 3 or 4 months along the year. So we try to compensate that by collecting the rain in the cisterns, in the wells, which it's not healthy. So, but we are forced to use this water, which causes many diseases for the children and for the inhabitants in the village. And my daughter was one case for that. She was infected by some infections because of the water, and she got a kidney failure.
Apartheid was the attempt to separate people and allow resources and privilege and rights to flow to people on the basis of the separate groups in which they were categorized.
And so you have the settlements are very strategic. It's not just real estate. They were built out of a proactive claim to the country.
פה סוף הדרך, פה זה מה שנקרא סביוני חברון. הארמון של דוד המלך, אוויר, עצי זית, עצי פרי. ויש 2 חלונות פונים לצד ההוא של העיר, רואים את כל העיר חברון, אז שכנה שלי קוראת לזה חלונות מוטיבציה. אבל מסתכלים, פותחים בבוקר את החלון, רואים מה עוד יש לעשות. למה כל עוד אנחנו רק פה ולא שם, אז... זהו. הבית הזה, בית של ערבים בינתיים, ויש פה עוד בית שהיה של ערבים ואם הוא יהודי. אז עם הזמן התייהד.
Nowhere is the government separation principle shown so starkly as in the city of Hebron, a city deep in the heart of the West Bank with a population of about 160,000 Palestinians. In the middle of Hebron, in Palestinian homes, often vacated under severe pressure, live 600 Jewish settlers, cordoned off and protected by thousands of soldiers. Although neighbors, these 2 populations live under 2 separate and unequal sets of laws. Jewish settlers in the West Bank live under Israeli civil law, while Palestinians live under Israeli military law.
بديش اسكر الباب. تدخليش انت. تسجري الدلت. تسجري الدلت. تسجري الدلت. ما بديش اسكر الباب. تشابت فوق الكلوب. شرموطة. شرموط. بكل البنات شلخ. ديري بالك انت ما تجيش هون. بدنا نطلع من برا انت ما لكش عنا. اتركيها. مش عارفه شو تعمل يا خيال.
The settler population in the West Bank is roughly 500,000. The Palestinian population in that same area is roughly 2.5 million.
So we have a classic situation of really an ethnic minority claiming the entire country, a large territory. And then now what do you do with the natives? What do you do with the whoever you are? In this case, the non-Jews.
in South Africa. The architecture was amazing. First, you give people an identity. Then, of course, you give people pass laws. So you define how they can move freely, and you construct blockages for the movement of people.
Control was exerted through a complicated pass system that determined when and where an African could move. These passes became one of the most detested symbols of apartheid.
The issue of the pass was much more than a question of identity or an identity document. It was a mechanism to ensure the control over people's movement and where people lived.
ממחר אתה עובר דרך אתה תשמע, ואתה מעל גיל 55, ממחר אתה לא עובר, רק אתה בסדר?
Today in occupied Palestine, Palestinians must carry IDs at all times that essentially dictate where they can live, work, and move. A complex system of movement restrictions requires special permits to enter certain areas. There are over 600 manned checkpoints and physical roadblocks in the West Bank that restrict the freedom of movement of Palestinians. Only 36 of these separate Israel and the West Bank. The rest separate Palestinian towns from other Palestinian towns.
Abuse, beatings, humiliation at the checkpoints is a routine part of the experience. It's part of the systematic disempowerment of Palestinians, placing an entire population at the mercy of 18, 19-year-old soldiers who have absolute power over the lives of Palestinians.
How many is it? Over 60 women who have given birth at checkpoints because some silly kid won't let them through, or taking 20 minutes to let an ambulance through.
شو بدي أفكر يعني مفكرش غير إنه في ابني يعني كيف بدنا نمرض بس كنت خايفة عليه يعني من الموت أنا كنت أتخيل دائما إنه بده يموت مش عارف يعني خلاص بدي أصرخ فيهم خفت يأخرونا أكثر بدي أشدهم خفت يأخذوا زوجي يعني كنت خايفة كثير خايفة منهم.
I called him after maybe 5 minutes. Please come here and see my child. He's dying. Please come and see him. He came and he said to me, "Why are you calling? Why are you calling me? Don't call us. I want to check your IDs and to check the cars. After you can go." I said to him, "Nothing here in the car. We are not going from the war. We are going from a house to go to hospital only. We haven't any weapons, we haven't arms, we have not anything. Only we are the four with the child." We reached the hospital. The doctor said to us, "We can do nothing to him. Your child died about 20 minutes ago."
بس أنا دائما طبعا بيبقى في داخلي غضب كبير ويعني بدي أصرخ عليهم بدي أضربهم بدي شو بدي أسوي يعني.
I have been able to visit Israel and Palestine on more than 2 occasions. And what I experienced there was such a crude reminder of our painful past in apartheid South Africa. we were largely controlled in the same way. The continuous checking at the roadblocks, and to see these young men and young women standing at the roadblock, having to perform the duties of a military junta. These parallels with Israel pained me severely while I was traveling through that lovely country.
The settlements are linked by modern superhighways, which are Jewish-only roads. Palestinians are not allowed to use them. And these superhighways crisscross across Palestinian land, linking the settlements together and linking them with Israeli cities inside the 1948 borders.
The separate roads that you find, kind of settlement infrastructure that you find in the West Bank, for example, which in South Africa, we didn't dream that we'd have roads that would be only for whites.
In 2008, there were 800 kilometers of Jewish-only roads in the West Bank, or as the Israeli military prefers to call them, sterile roads. Settlers are issued yellow license plates so that the military can distinguish them from Palestinian drivers.
אוקיי, זה כביש 443 בין ירושלים לתל אביב. דרך טובה לכל אלה שרוצים לברוח מכביש מספר 1, שחק קצת הפקקים.
הוא גם כביש נוח לנסיעה. אין בו כביש רובו ישר. לא עיקולים, לא זה, והוא כביש מאוד נוח לנסיעה, וגם מקצר, נדמה לי ב7 קילומטר בדירה. תשים לב, מהמחסום, כולם חסומות. כל היציאות חסומות. עכשיו יש להם כביש מקביל. יש פה כבישים מקבילים לכביש הזה.
شو هذا اللي ولا طريق يعني مش سيارة لا ايش بحكي على السيارة الصنافة السيارة على جاسية احنا سياراتنا كلبن على بياض الشوارع.
The other part of this system is the Palestinian roads, which is linking the Palestinian villages and cities together, but it is tunnels, in the tunnels and bridges under the main network of roads that they are creating for themselves. And this bridges and this tunnels, it has gates, and the gates has locked, and the locks is in the hands of the soldiers. It means if they want to do curfew all over the West Bank in 2 hours, they can do it.
جاء المستوطنون سنة 1987 منعوا السيارات من السير على الشارع الالتفافي والشارع الرئيسي للقرية.
The Jewish-only roads serving the settlement of Avnei Hefetz are but one of the many examples of the segregated road system in the West Bank. Because of the settlement, Israel declared the roads between the Palestinian towns of Shufa and Izbat Shufa a sterile road for Jews only, erecting dirt roadblocks for Palestinians at every exit of the town. Recently, Israel allowed Palestinian pedestrian but not vehicular traffic on the road. Due to these conditions, 1 out of every 4 families has left Shufa.
بسبب انهم منعونا نقطع الشارع نروح على طول كريم، فبنلف في 30 كيلومتر تاني، علما ان المسافه بيننا وبين طول كريم 7 كيلومتر. شوفي 2000 نسمه، في حين عدد المستوطنين 300 نسمه، بتمتعوا في كل شيء، محرومين. احنا اصحاب الحق والارض بس محرومين نروح ونيجي براحتهم. المهم في المستوطنين هذول انهم بيجوا هون 300 مستوطن، بروحوا بيرجعوا نهاية اسبوع، بيناموا هون وبعدين بقيت حياتهم بغضوها في نتانيا بتل أبيب إسرائيل. يعني انحرمنا مشان بس متعتهم، يعني يقعدوا هون بس يوم أو يومين.
A deeply religious people, the white Afrikaners of South Africa believed they had a God-given right to a land that they considered mostly uninhabited. In what is known as the Great Trek, what Afrikaners consider their equivalent of the Exodus, thousands trekked into the wilderness in search of the promised land. The Afrikaners pushed into land the Africans considered theirs, and many battles ensued. Armed with guns and protected by a circle of covered wagons known as a lager, the Afrikaners easily beat back the indigenous masses that outnumbered them. This image of the heroic settlers in their lager fending off the savage masses became the dominant mythology in Afrikaner history, morphing into the philosophy of apartheid in 1948. Under apartheid law, the one standard against which everything was judged was the security of the state, and the state meant the Afrikaner people. With every law enacted, the freedoms of the majority were whittled away in order to protect the privileges of a white minority. In Pretoria today stands a monument to the Great Trek, a shrine to this history and philosophy. A concrete lager, that iconic image of the Afrikaners' military defense tactic, completely surrounds the monument, a physical representation of a state of mind that sees enemies everywhere and will do anything to protect against them.
What I experienced there was made even more painful by the existence of the wall of separation, what we from South Africa prefer to call the apartheid wall. We didn't have that type of division in South Africa.
In 2002, under the guise of a temporary security measure, Israel began construction of the separation barrier to completely seal off the West Bank from Israel. In urban areas, it is a concrete wall 8 meters tall. In rural areas, it is a smart fence, averaging 60 meters wide with motion, heat, and vibration sensors, cameras, trenches, patrol roads, and razor wire. To many, however, the wall is not about security. Its snake-like route through the West Bank annexes large Jewish-only settlements, agricultural land, and important water resources, clearly marking it as a tool for massive land grabs. Only 15% of the wall follows the Green Line. Instead, the wall twists and turns deep into the West Bank, making it more than twice as long as the Green Line itself. It separates Palestinian villages from neighboring Palestinian villages, farmers from their land and income, parents from children, and severely restricts Palestinian freedom of movement. It encircles many towns from all sides, creating isolated ghettos surrounded by walls, checkpoints, and Israeli-only roads.
When you put people behind the wall in all of these ghettos, because almost everywhere it is creating ghetto communities with one road or one checkpoint or one tunnel with a gate in it out, then at a certain point there is going to be, when there's not enough work and not enough food, more and more pressure built up. Obviously a lot of people will leave, and I think that's part of the intention.
Now, in the South African context, the attempt by the apartheid government was to de-citizenize more than 80% of the South African population, and then give them new citizenship in some kind of a fantasy entity, Botswana, Transkei, etc. So the South African state could say, you have no claims over us, you're a citizen of Botswana. social benefits, etc., is what you should be looking for there.
The godfather of the system was Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd.
In South Africa, you can only achieve peace by separating the nations.
And he spelled out the whole Bantustan concept. He said the black people have got to be given their own countries. They embarked upon this remarkable experiment of trying to cut up the country into Bantustans. And these were created, at least on paper, 10 of them. And the move began to advance them towards independence.
My government would like to continue, as we are, an autonomous and independent country, preferably with extended borders, continued friendly and cordial relations with our neighbors, and if possible, international recognition.
Most of them were stooges and really puppets of the apartheid state.
To give some veneer of reality to the fantasy of the Bantustans, the Afrikaner government threw money at them, built elaborate parliaments, housing for ministers, built airports, sports stadiums. It was to create separate states. It was not so much a two-state solution as a multi-state solution. When I look at Israel and when I travel through the West Bank, I was looking at Bantustans, totally unviable, impossible states. In many respects, it struck me as being significantly worse than apartheid.
Bantustans, as much as we abhorred them in South Africa, Bantustan leaders actually had more power and more control than the Palestinian Authority has. What Oslo did was create an authority which allowed Israel to still control the occupied Palestinian territory, but control it through a Palestinian Authority. Ostensibly, there's some kind of Palestinian authority that's controlling, that's in power of the occupied territory. In fact, Israel controls the borders, Israel controls taxes, Israel controls all kinds of things, access in and out of that area.
To me, the big analogy was that South Africa, in taking these two choices, where you've got two or more nationalisms laying claim to the same country, you either got to find a way to live together or you've got to have a fair partition. The big similarity between apartheid South Africa and the Israeli-Palestinian situation is that both decided to have a partition solution. And in both cases, it was a grotesquely unfair partition.
And this is why Israel says, well, Gaza is not our problem. Gaza is a foreign country. It's not a state. It's not part of any other country. It's just not us.
Just like South Africa, it's the same logic. We need a Palestinian state because we can't digest the Palestinians. We can't give them citizenship, because then it wouldn't be a Jewish state. We have to create a Palestinian state because it's the only way we can get them off our hands. But it has to be a minimized state on as little territory as possible that leaves us in control of the entire country.
South Africa, they were talking about 13% of South Africa to the South African people in cantons, looking them in cantons. Here, when you look at the map, what they are created is about leaving to the Palestinians 12% of our historical land. This is the ghetto state, ghetto system that they are creating here. And it's totally disconnected from each other. We have 1, 2, 3, and the fourth is Gaza.
صار اللي هو يوم سبت 27 كنا نحن في الحلم بقاش يخطر على بالنا انه تصير حرب زي هذه. احنا طبعا ليل ونهار كان القصف شغال، الخبط شغال، الفسفور، ما تعرفش ايش تسوي، كل شوي والثانيه ينزل صاروخ في المنطقه اللي انت فيها، تحمل اولادك وتاخذ مرتك وتجري في الشارع. 21 يوم وانتهت الحرب، وطبعا جينا صرنا نفقد حالنا، اللي بده يشوف مرته، اللي يشوف اولاده، اللي يشوف مش عارف ايش. غرفه واحده جيت طبعا، جيت بيتي مهدوم، مطبخ رايح، صالون رايح، غرفه رايحه، باب الدار رايح، الحيطان هذا كله رايح، كله راح. واحد من الناس انا نايم في شارع، يعني انا بنام في الشارع.
الحمام كيف ما تشوف غير سترنا بالبطن.
انا يعني انستر ما حدا يشوفني، ما حدا يشوف زوجتي، ما حدا يشوف بناتي. العالم كله طبعا ما شافش الحرب هذه اللي صارت علينا. مرت الحرب على سلام، هلقيت اجى وقت الجوع ووقت الاهانات. يعني تجيب طحين لاولادك ما فيش، تجيب خضره ما فيش، تجيب كله هذا طبعا مش موجود عندي. هذا كله طبعا من الحصار.
Since 2006, Israel has imposed a deadly siege on the Gaza Strip, prohibiting most goods and people from entering or leaving the enclave. The siege has caused an economic standstill in Gaza. The unemployment rate hovers around 40%. On the more ridiculous end of the spectrum of goods not allowed into Gaza are things like pasta and chocolate. Recently obtained Israeli government documents show this to be a deliberate policy. Mathematic formulas were created which define the minimum caloric needs of the 1.5 million people in Gaza, as well as an upper limit so that food items cannot become too plentiful. In 2009, Israel bombed Gaza's sewage treatment facilities and electricity plants, and now won't allow the necessary parts in to repair them. Restrictions on fuel imports further limit the ability of critical infrastructure to function, while also causing daily, prolonged blackouts. Blackouts can be deadly for patients in hospitals, but more so is the lack of medicine, specialized care, and clean water.
كهرب، ما فيش كهرب، ما فيش اكل، ما فيش شرب. يعني احنا الميه اللي بدنا نشربها بنشتريها شراء. يعني احنا بنتكلم وبنتنفس على الفاضي. يعني حياتنا موت بطيء جدا. احنا في عذاب الله اعلم به.
In the worst times of apartheid in South Africa, we never had in any of our townships helicopter gunships flying overhead or F-16 type bombers flying over a township and firing or dropping bombs into a township. It didn't happen.
The problem is we don't have other examples to look at now. You could look at perhaps the Warsaw Ghetto as one example of that kind of walled in and then attacking a walled in community like that. Maybe a better example is hundreds and hundreds of years ago, where you had walled city-states that were completely besieged by armies, where no one could get out and food was denied. And if there wasn't a spring within the city, no one had water and people died. Just like in Gaza, people died from insufficient access to medicine, to insufficient water, all those reasons, as well as by airstrikes. There are a number of people and some governments who have been claiming that because Israel withdrew its settlers and soldiers from the Gaza Strip unilaterally in 2005, that it's no longer the occupying power. But that actually is not the case. In international law, occupation refers to the control of territory by another government, not the indigenous government there. That's precisely what exists with Israel and the Gaza Strip right now. Israel still controls the land of the Gaza Strip, which many people don't know is completely surrounded by a wall very similar to the wall that snakes through the West Bank. It is completely surrounded. The Israeli Navy controls the seas off the coast of Gaza. The airspace is controlled by Israel, which has prohibited the Palestinians from reopening their airport. So Gaza is completely under the control of the Israelis.
The Palestinian Authority can't issue identity documents, passports, permissions for people to come and go, independent of the Israeli Interior Ministry. If you don't exist in the Israeli Interior Ministry database, you don't exist, period.
If you look at the blueprint of a prison, it looks like the prisoners own the place. They have 95% of the territory, right? They have the living areas, they have the exercise yard, they have the cafeteria, they have the work areas. It all belongs to the prisoners. All the prison authorities have is maybe 5%. And you know what? If it's a minimal security prison, maybe they have 1%. That's all you need. You need the walls around, cell bars, you have some corridors, you have a few locked doors, and that's it. With 1% of the territory, you can absolutely control the inmates. And that helps you make the switch. The issue here isn't how much territory the prisoners have. The issue is, can they get out of the prison?
When the majority of world leaders and people who have the power to change things talk about two-state solution nowadays, what they talk about is a Palestinian state that is made of Bantustans, separated from each other, a state that has no sovereignty, no independent policies, and has a very much a similar economic infrastructure to the ones that the Bantustans had in South Africa.
The main thing for the world and for the Israelis is to get this issue off the plate. And that's where Israel thinks it can get away with a Bantustan in the way that South Africa couldn't. You know, you can push a two-state solution. That's apartheid. It doesn't have borders, it doesn't have water, it doesn't have access to its greatest economic resource, which is Jerusalem. It's carved into little islands. There's no freedom of movement. There's no freedom of commerce. It's a prison state. And therefore, the essential idea of a two-state solution has to be not only the state itself, but a viable state.
The Israelis have rendered the West Bank and Gaza unviable, hopelessly unviable. I'm saying Israel no longer has that solution as an option. It has made a two-state solution impossible, physically, morally impossible.
It is time for us to go ahead and move forward on a two-state solution. So thank you very much.
You hear all this talk about a two-state solution. You see opinion polls that say a majority of Israelis are willing to accept it and a majority of Palestinians are willing to accept it. But that consensus disappears the moment you try to actually flesh it out in detail. That's why all the two-state solution proposals are extremely vague. Because Palestinians say the West Bank and Gaza are only a fifth of historic Palestine. Why should we give up any more? Israelis say, well, there's 450,000 settlers in those areas, several generations. Why should they leave? The only thing more difficult than trying to live together would be trying to force a separation.
Israel's overall goal has been to create a Jewish state. In 1948, 75% of the population, the non-Jewish population, Christians and Muslims, were expelled from their homeland and never allowed to return for one reason and only one reason, which is that they're not Jewish.
The 5 to 6 million refugees living in Lebanon and in Syria and in Jordan, etc., those are people that should be Israeli citizens, that Israel has kicked out and refused citizenship.
Over 1 million Palestinians became refugees in the 1948 and 1967 wars. By natural population growth, they now number over 5 million people who still await their right to return. Some Palestinians managed to stay inside what became Israel in 1948 and today make up 20% of Israeli citizens.
So in the Israeli state, what kind of rights and privileges and resources are allocated to you are entirely dependent on which ethnic group you come from. You're either Jewish or you Palestinian or Arab, as they prefer to call them. And so you have a situation where welfare benefits for people, for example, are dependent on whether they're Jewish or not. You have a situation where a Jew can't marry a non-Jew in Israel, which is, for us as South Africans, we remember the Mixed Marriages Act, for example. You have a situation where people from one ethnic group, Palestinians, are not able to freely live in areas that are majority Jewish, similar to our Group Areas Act.
Now, one of the criticisms people make when you start accusing Israel of being an apartheid state inside its own borders is that they'll say, well, Palestinians can sit next to Jews inside restaurants. They sit on the same buses. They go to the same cinemas. And that's true. But that's not really the significance of apartheid. The idea of apartheid isn't really about the fact that people can't sit on the same park bench. It was about controlling resources, making sure that one ethnic group had control of resources and the other didn't. And in that sense, Israel has been very, very effective at doing this, what we might call grand apartheid rather than petty apartheid. In the key areas of people's lives, their education, their employment, owning land, Palestinian citizens are treated entirely differently from Jewish citizens. And I think that's one of the reasons why this apartheid comparison can be made.
By far, the most fundamental element of apartheid with both South Africa and Israel is control of the land. In apartheid South Africa, a slew of laws were enacted that designated 87% of the land for whites only. This introduced the oxymoronic term, quote, foreign natives, into the language of parliament to describe blacks given permission to live in white areas. Israel's complex and creative web of apartheid laws introduced equally oxymoronic terms such as, quote, present absentee into its parliamentary language. This was used to describe Palestinians who are actually present inside Israel, but legally declared absent in order to confiscate their land. Through these colonial and apartheid-style laws, over 90% of the land of Israel is effectively reserved for Jews only. Aside from the few mixed cities like Haifa and Akko, most of Israel's communities are segregated along ethnic lines. Israel's 1.3 million Palestinian citizens are restricted to 120 communities that existed before the creation of Israel in 1948 and which have been unable to expand since. By contrast, Israel has created and developed more than 700 exclusively Jewish towns since 1948, but not one new town for Palestinian citizens.
Land laws in Israel, which are very clearly apartheid kind of laws. You can belong in the state of Israel, you can be a Palestinian or you could be a Jew. But if you want to have rights in the state, really you need to be a Jew to have rights. I have no doubt it's a Jewish state, but I do question very strongly whether it's a democratic state. If we talked about an Afrikaner and democratic state, I think most of us would find that a rather oxymoronic kind of phrase to use. So why is Jewish and democratic not equally troubling to us? There are more than 1 million Palestinians inside Israel today, and that's a major concern for Israel. It's very concerned about the demographic growth, as it calls it, the demographic time bomb of the Palestinians inside Israel.
I came to realize that when they talk about the elimination of Israel, it's a demographic thing. That Israel will cease to exist when it no longer has a Jewish majority. In other words, your nationhood depends upon your having either an ethnic or specifically religious majority permanently entrenched because of the experience I've gone through in this country, where I saw terrible injustice committed in the name of the Afrikaners' need to survive. I became ashamed of my country, grievously ashamed of it.
The reason Israel has a Jewish majority is through entirely artificial means. The whole framework of Israeli law is designed to prevent the growth of the non-Jewish population and maintain Jewish numerical and political supremacy. And that's the framework in which we can understand everything we see inside Israel as well as in the West Bank and Gaza.
بسرعة لما تاني يخلص ربطت في الخراب الحارة يا طبعا ما فيش ولا حدا هون يا ترى ما قادر يشوف الحارة فيش ولا حدا وين سمير وين سمير وين سمير
In occupied East Jerusalem, the battle for control of territory is happening on a house-by-house basis. Israel goes to incredible lengths to manipulate demography, as can be seen in the stark but complicated case of the city of Jerusalem. East Jerusalem differs from the rest of occupied Palestinian territory in that Israel unilaterally declared it a part of the State of Israel following the 1967 occupation of the city. No country in the world has ever recognized that annexation, and it is still considered occupied territory by the Palestinians and by international law. But by building the wall and the vast settlement blocks around it, Israel has illegally severed it from the West Bank. Over 250,000 Palestinians now find themselves on the Israel side of the wall. Palestinians of East Jerusalem are not citizens of the country, cannot vote in national elections, and cannot live in Jewish West Jerusalem.
A Palestinian can live in Jerusalem all his life, was born here, his father, his grandfather, and generations before, but he will be a resident. A Jew from Russia can come today to Israel. He doesn't know even one word in Hebrew, and in the same day he is a citizen. There are many conditions to be a resident. If you, for example, live in Jerusalem, but you work in Ramallah, in Bethlehem, or in the occupied territories, they say the center of your life is there, and we can take your ID. This is one of the strategies to make the number of the Palestinians more small. This is the booklet, an official one from the municipality of Jerusalem, from the Department of Planning. And in the first point here, they say is to keep the equilibrium between the Jewish and Palestinians like was in 67. That's mean, look at this, 37, as the government decided. You must understand, if in any democratic country in the world, someone will say that the Jewish will be not more than 40% of the population, we will say that this is anti-Semitism. It's clear that it's anti-Semitism. So why is anti-Semitism in Europe and America if someone will do the same? And in Israel, it's permitted. Why? The politicians are hysteric around this issue, and they try to implement a policy of segregation in order to make the life of the Palestinians so bad that they will decide voluntarily, alone, to leave the city.
One of the harshest methods used to force Palestinians to leave Jerusalem is Israel's house demolition policy. This policy affects all Palestinians living within Israel's stated borders and even within the rest of the West Bank, but it is starkest in Jerusalem.
House demolitions are part of a system of discrimination that does not enable Palestinians to actually build legally. It's fair to say that it's virtually impossible to receive a building permit, a legal permit to build a house in East Jerusalem if you're a Palestinian.
ما قبلوا احنا إنا بنقدم في رخصة تانهم يقبلوا يعطونا رخصة من قبل 20 سنة يعطونا رخصة جينا غمرنا وبنينا ليش ما فيش بطلعش رخص هذا الأرض مش إلك هذا الأرض مصادرة مش إلك هذا يعني الله بقول تيجي تطلعوا عفشنا وقاعدين فيه وتهدوا علينا وولاد صغار وحالتنا حالة شو بدي أعمل شو بدنا نساوي يعني زي ما خدوا البلاد طردونا زي ما تطرد ذبان عنك جايين بدهم يطردونا دار يعني تعملها مشان تهجج الناس مشان الناس تزهق وتطلع يعني أنا من يوم ما نهدي البيت لليوم وأنا في الفراش شو نسوي
Wednesday, July 22nd, 1962. The Boers are breaking down our house. 2 bulldozers. And of course the house crumbled. I felt the pain. It was my blood, my bones, our flesh that was being broken down. No book can describe, no poem can describe the horror, because our houses were not houses. They were human beings. I saw bone and blood and veins and brains.
And of course, when a demolition finally happens, I can't even begin to convey to you the trauma. And the home is your sacred space. Your whole intimate sphere is in the house. Men, women, and children react very differently. For the men, it's humiliating. They can't protect their families. It's an entire financial loss. For women, most Palestinian women don't work outside of the house. So the domestic space is their world. So when a woman loses that, I've seen women go into states of mourning. The trauma is tremendous. The demolition of a home is really the demolition of a family. We estimate that in East Jerusalem, there are at least 10,000 demolition orders outstanding. Houses can be demolished at any time. That doesn't include thousands that have been demolished inside Israel. Inside Israel, there's still a campaign of demolition. There's about 40,000 homes of Israeli citizens who are Arabs that are slated for demolition in the next few years. And this is on the background of 1948, when more than half the villages of Palestine, more than 400 villages, were systematically destroyed.
After the state was created, Israel continued to forcibly remove thousands of its Palestinian citizens off of their lands onto small, concentrated areas. Their villages were bulldozed to make way for Jewish-only towns. This policy still continues inside Israel today, with over 45 Palestinian villages that the government refuses to recognize and which are slated to be forcibly removed in order to construct new Jewish-only towns.
أنا ربيت على وجه الدنيا زي كذا صغيرة وكبرت وأنا تجوزت وجبت أولاد هذول كلهم من عند هذاك البيت لأن مش معترف فينا ما بنعرف عن ديري حتى يعني دكان ما في عندنا بس بنروح للسبعة بنشتري ومكسارة بنوها واحنا هان والتنبو هذا كل قرية يهودا هذا بنوها واحنا كانوا ناس ساكنين وشيلوهم 50 سيارة بوليس وجوا بوليسية وجوا بوليسيات شرطيات واحنا اجنا نسوي معهم ليش نبني يقطعونا مصاري واحنا نبني يا ريت يقطعونا ودنا نقعد على مجراه وين نروح يعني
The apartheid authorities had what they called black spots, incidents where black people were occupying land where the white people actually wanted to occupy. And what they therefore did was to send in the police, send in the military with heavy trucks that would break down the homes of people and that would remove families that have been staying on land for decades and remove them and just dump them.
It was nice in so far until the Afrikaner people started harassing us. They said we are staying nearer to town. We are blacks. We are not supposed to stay there. So they started moving us to Meadowlands.
Because they said we can't stay near the white people, so that they must separate us, we mustn't be together. So they take the place, they give it to the whites. They give us only 1 day notice. Tomorrow we are moving. The truck will wait outside, and then the soldiers will go into the house, remove the furniture into the truck. Then take you children, put you behind the truck, the mother and father.
They just bulldoze it to the ground. They take the family out, the bulldozer comes.
Land is more than just a possession. Land is something integrally bound in with your identity. It's about your ancestors. It's about a sense of knowing who and where you are from. And in South Africa, that's where the biggest damage has been done. This removal of people off the land. And they put in these God-forsaken places with nothing. And they have to start all over again.
لا كانوا يجوا يهدموا كل القريه يعني والخيام اللي بتشوفون والبركات هاي للمره السادسه احنا بنبني صرتوا هدي للمره الخامسه يعني شو حوالي مليون وش طب مليون بتخطط وبتعمل شارع اسفلت احنا سكان راضينا انتوا يا اليهود انتوا اللي جيتوا علينا انتوا المحتلين مش احنا المحتلين لكم يعني بنعيش وبنموت كل ما بتهدم دار واحد عندنا كأنك ذبحته موته ويظلوا حي يعني لا هو حي ولا هو ميت وحي.
You can shave off my hair. New hair will grow. You can spit in my face. I will find water to wash it. You can take away my clothes and leave me naked. I will find a blanket. But if you take away my house and my dignity,
Where can I go? Where? There is no pain quite like being unloved, unwanted in one's own land among one's own kind. The Jewish people come from that experience. Jews will always have the right, and I would support that right for memory and perpetuation. But now I feel it for the Palestinians. I feel it for them because they are stateless, homeless, vanquished, exiled. You take away my house. You take away my dignity. You take away my love, and you replace it with bitterness, anger, and revenge.
Been at least 100,000 Palestinians, if not more, that have gone through house demolition. There's a psychologist in Gaza in the Palestinian Mental Health Center who's done research who says that 55% of the suicide bombings are kids whose houses have been demolished. The house demolition issue is one of the most painful parts of the occupation. If you deny Palestinians a home, and connected to that is a concept of homeland, on two levels you're denying them a home, on the individual level and the collective level. The term we use in Hebrew for our form of apartheid is nishul. Nishul means displacement or dispossession. That's the Israeli form of apartheid.
The escalation of the Israeli measures, the way how they treated the Palestinian before the first Intifada, make it difficult for the people to accept oppression.
In 1987, as the occupation rolled into its third decade, the first Intifada, or uprising, erupted.
People, they go, protest, strike, throwing stones, organize themselves in groups, challenge the Israeli occupation in different ways. The things came from the ground in the first Intifada, where everyone, no matter who you are, man or woman, young or old, you are connected to a certain group working in this Intifada. It was amazing how the people, they were organized. The people, they took a stand. They had a slogan, no taxation without representation. The Israeli occupation closed down all the education institutions, from the universities to the kindergartens, for 2.5 years. They were very strong in their reaction. The number of the people they were killed, children, youth, women. Thousands of people they were killed. This is the Israeli reaction. If you visit any family in Palestine, West Bank, and Gaza Strip, at least you will find someone experienced the jail. To go to jail, I don't want to say it's normal, but it's, to be a Palestinian, it's enough. It's enough reason to be in jail. It's part of the daily life in Palestine. Over 700,000 Palestinians experienced the jail since 1967.
Proportionately, there are more political prisoners there than existed in South Africa. In South Africa, we had a campaign against child detainees. In Palestine, you have over 350 children who are political prisoners.
They would take very many of our children away from parents and try and use that to coerce parents to appear at police stations to report.
I remember in 1988, you see prisoners coming like crazy. In a few months, we became 6,000 political prisoners in one jail. And 95% of them, they were administrative detentions.
Administrative detention is the detention, usually for 6 months, but you can extend it, of people based on no kind of legal procedure aside from issuing an administrative order. People are arrested without knowing what they are in for. They've never been charged with anything. The way it's been done by Israel is absolutely in contravention of international law.
I remember in the 70s, there were a famous Palestinian political prisoners. He spent like around 7 years as administrative detention. And it's scary. It's really scary because you don't know. And they use it part of the torture. Sometimes it's the day after, for example, 6 months or 1 year in jail. And this is the last day for you, the day you were released. They come to the jail, they call your name, you collect all your stuff, you were released, you say bye-bye to the prisoners, and you move outside, and the officer comes, sorry, another 6 months, you go back to the jail.
Administrative detention, very similar to the detention without trial in South Africa.
When you are about to be released, they will release you and let you walk a few steps and rearrest you, which is, by the way, another form of torture because you never actually are sure as to whether you will be allowed, totally released.
I was arrested in 1985, and there was nothing illegal about what it was that I was doing. And they knew that they could therefore not take me to court and charge me with anything. They basically detained us because they could do it.
Why Mandela became the hero to the issue of the political prisoners? He spent 27 years in the apartheid system jail. Right now, we have prisoners that spent more than 30 years in jail, more than the Mandela. Why the international community is not paying attention for that?
Within 1 year of each other, both Israel and South Africa launched Operation Iron Fist, brutal and overwhelming campaigns to crush opposition to their respective policies.
With the Iron Fist policy, they used to open the handcuffed and take the people's arms like this and break down the bone in this way. I still remember the sound of my friend when they break his arm. The sound still in my ear. I will never, ever forget that.
He went as far as killing very many of our comrades, brutally, acts that you can never imagine.
The South African Defense Forces, as they were called, their army and navy was almost totally outfitted by Israel because South Africa couldn't get weapons from other countries. Israel was one of the only countries willing to break the arms embargo.
Well, the alliance started in earnest in 1973. By 1979, about 35% of Israel's arms exports were going to South Africa. So they became a crucial client and also a crucial source for export revenue that Israel couldn't give up easily. And it involved everything from tanks to aircraft to ammunition, you name it. After 77, there's a mandatory UN arms embargo. Israel violated the UN arms embargo openly, and many Israeli officials are happy to admit that. If you talk to South African defense officials, especially people from the Air Force, they tell you that Israel was an absolutely vital link and was a lifeline for them during the 1980s. After 1977, the ideological component becomes much stronger. The top brass of the two militaries really felt that they were in a similar predicament and that they faced a common enemy. They also had a very similar conception of minority survival. There was a sense that Afrikaner nationalists were similar to Israelis. a beleaguered minority surrounded by a hostile majority. When you look through the documents from the South African Defense Archive, you see that dozens of South Africans were going to Israel on a regular basis to attend a variety of courses, whether it involved submarine operation, anti-tank technology, counterinsurgency techniques, you name it. They really see the PLO and the ANC as one and the same.
The reaction of the government ordering a general mobilization, arming the white community, arresting 10,000s of Africans, the show of force throughout the country, close a chapter as far as our methods of political struggle are concerned. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
Bombs have exploded almost daily in the run-up to Wednesday's poll, the latest a huge car bomb which devastated shops in the central town of Witbank. The blasts have been officially blamed on the African National Congress.
After decades of nonviolent struggle, Nelson Mandela formed the armed wing of the African National Congress. They turned first to sabotage, then to civilian bombings in order to have their political aspirations recognized.
If this was the work of the ANC, it's their boldest attack to date and demonstrates the organization's determination to carry the guerrilla war to South Africa's major city centers.
The explosion tore apart the bus in the very heart of Jerusalem, killing many of those on board. It was the mirror image of last week's suicide bomb.
I am pained when I read the story of a 65-year-old Palestinian woman who became a carrier of a suicide bomb. And in a note, she indicated that she had to do that because she was trying to save her grandchildren from being killed. And we're saying, what unfair choices to put before people.
Security and terrorism are important issues, but they're symptoms, and they're not independent variables. Israel is a strong party. Once you bring the occupation into the picture, there isn't any more symmetry. There's no more both sides, us and them, the balance that everybody loves. Palestinians aren't occupying Tel Aviv.
And we're pleading that we do not wait for more people to be killed. It is quite apparent that the political authorities will on their own not act. We need to pressurize it.
Despite all its repressive machinery, there's general kind of agreement that it was the international dimension and the internal resistance, the South African Intifada, if you like, that really brought an end to apartheid. You had a mass of people, people's movements and resistance organizations, etc., that were, in terms of numbers of people, quite large, but weak, taking on very sophisticated structures of repression. So a really powerful opponent on one hand and a weak one on the other. It was the international isolation campaign that brought a sense of balance between the two.
At that point, the South Africans actually seek out advice from the Israelis on how to sell themselves in the West and how to improve their image. The South Africans looked to Israel as a sort of beacon, and they didn't understand why Israel had managed to withstand criticism for decades and survive, and why South Africa was failing. A lot of Israelis fear that they may one day be delegitimized in the same way South Africa was.
Boycott, divest, and sanction. Boycott, divest, and sanction. Boycott, divest, and sanction. Israel, you should be ashamed. Killing, maim thousands of civilians in our name. Claim you hitting terrorists, but children in your aim. Even murder relief workers, what's spilling from their brain while they tried to drive the ambulance. So they couldn't stand a chance. Even bomb students, hospitals, Mas Rafa and Khan Yunis. Shot them in their back like the cops to Oscar Grant. And in each case, the good old United States sponsored that. $7 million a day that we paid tax, and APAC's lobbyists is robbing us. Sometimes it feels like there ain't no stopping this, but now nobody can deny it, cause you made it too obvious. Naked truth exposed like the emperor's clothes.
What we'd really like is for members of the public to realise that they actually have a real positive role to play. They can actually boycott these goods, and we think that, well, we're only individuals, but together when we act holistically, such as the protest today, and even on an individual day-to-day basis, we can have a real impact in challenging the occupation on a long-term level.
The global call came in 2005 from Palestinian civil society organizations. And the idea was to craft a strategy that would be a nonviolent means of pressuring Israel to abide by international law, using economic pressure. These campaigns are taking root. They're gaining new supporters every day. The churches have taken the lead in saying, we want socially responsible investment. And that means we want to be sure that none of the companies we invest in are profiting from occupation.
There are many initiatives going around the world for boycotting Israeli goods, boycotting Israeli institutions, and so on. So it's growing in the cultural, academic, medical, even trade unions in South Africa. COSATU, the main trade union body in South Africa, which has about 2 million members, supported the boycott. There are so many. They're mushrooming, really, in the last 2 years.
This is happening more and more. In North America, you had the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Prior to that, the Canadian Union of Public Employees.
The incredible growing movement. I mean, I've traveled to literally dozens of campuses around the United States, and there are active divestment groups. There are church divestment movements that are starting and really gaining strength and facing incredible resistance, but they're not being deterred by it.
As our South African comrades and colleagues remind us, their first call for boycott was issued in the late 1950s. Europe and the West started listening in the 70s, early 80s. So it took them 25, 30 years to get anybody to listen to them. So we're doing much better, they tell us. You're going much faster than we have.
Divest from the apartheid like South Africa. Boycott them like King to Montgomery buses. Show them we want peace, but only with real justice. They murdering the media and witnesses left. We're gonna stop shopping at all the businesses that invest.
The idea of a one-state solution begins with the notion that no matter how they got there, no matter the competing historical narratives, the country belongs to all who live in it. Let 100% of the people live in 100% of the land, since nobody can agree on how to divide it.
Israel's going to have to stop being a Jewish state. It can't be an ethnocracy, and it has to become a democracy, whether it's one state or a confederation or whatever the arrangement is. That's what's going to happen. And it doesn't mean, I try to tell Israelis, that, everything's lost. I mean, in South Africa, people still talk Afrikaans. They still have an Afrikaner university. They still have, nobody's going to stop speaking Hebrew here. You're restructuring. It'll be in a different, more healthy environment. That's the challenge. That's why I like this one-state idea.
It wasn't only blacks who were freed when apartheid ended. I was freed. We all were freed. We were liberated from this terrible, corrosive vision of trying to build an ethnically pure state.
And decades of apartheid regime propaganda, like decades of Zionist propaganda, say that said to the people, if you give up control, you will be devoured, you will be thrown into the sea, you will be killed. And so it was very important for the anti-apartheid movement to offer to ordinary white citizens a credible message, an alternative, to say you will not be devoured. You give up the system and you will have a place in the future, and it's an inclusive future.
There's already a one state. It's already one state, but it's a one state living under apartheid. It's how to transform it from apartheid to democracy, where people get equal rights based on citizenship, not on ethnicity, religion, gender, or any other identity.
In South Africa, saying that the country belongs to all who live in it doesn't magically solve the problems. There are still massive political struggles in South Africa over resource allocation, over the speed of land reform, the speed of economic reform, over affirmative action. Those struggles for social justice continue, but they have to start from the premise that everyone is entitled to equal rights.
But you know, the world doesn't stand still. There are people I meet today in South Africa who don't understand what apartheid was about. They're coming to a whole new world. So it's not impossible to think of other generations. We must have the ability to think beyond our own generation, to think into the future.
What does it matter if a man is white or black? What does it matter if he's a Jew or he's an Arab? It is possible. Israel, it is possible. It is possible to have peace with Jews and Arabs if the heart is ready, if the soul is ready, if we can transcend these petty foibles of power and pomposity, and we say to this world, it is possible. It is possible.
Recording in progress.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? We good? Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We really didn't expect this turnout, so we're flabbergasted, blown away. absolutely just wow. We now have a 15-minute intermission for individuals who, in terms of mental health support, we do have a trauma-informed registered psychotherapist, Barak, at the back. If anyone needs to talk or discuss, she's readily available for you. This is the QR code for you to ask any questions, queries, concerns that you've had during the movie. Please feel free to scan. We will be closing the question cutoff at 8:15, 8:20. So make sure you get in. For individuals who don't want to use their phone, we do have slides and we have cue cards ready for you with pencils. Please raise your hand and we'll have one of our volunteers give you a cue card. All right, thank you so much and enjoy. Okay. Oh, what are we doing? We're good?
من توالي الليل وجفون عليهم من شفت الدمعات وجفون ألا يا راكبين الخيل والجفون معاكم للولف لبعت جواي شبب يا مشبب وحدي يا حادي واضرب بالقادم ع أرض بلادي
ياما عيني للهنا يا روح ما بدي منك لكم خلعة ولا لا 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 بدي زنار بيني يامان يامان عيني للهنا يا روح ما بدي منك لكم خلعة ولا لا 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 بدي زنار بيني يامان يامان عيني للهنا يا روح إلا غزالي الذي جواني لكم محبوس بيني يامان يامان عيني للهنا يا روح إلا غزالي الذي جواني ليكم ما يدوم بين يا من عيني للهنا يا روح يا طالعين عيني للجبل يا مول المقيدين النار بين يا من عيني للهنا يا روح يا طالعين عين للجبل يا مول الموقدين النار بين اليمن يمن عين للهنا يا روح
شامي ليلى يا رويلي للدين شامي ليلى يا رويلي لو حالي ليلى بواب خلولو بتفتح شامي ليلى يا رويلي لو وهني الليلة لبحت معي ليل الريح الشامي ليلى يا رويلي لو يا سيلي روي دور ليلي حلال حبيلي لابا يا رويلي لو شامي ليلى يا رويلي للدين شامي ليلى يا رويلي لو حالي ليلى بواب خلولو بتفتح شامي ليلى يا رويلي لو واني الليلة لبحت معي ليل الريح الشامي ليلى يا رويلي لو يا سيلي روي دور ليلي حلال حبيلي لابا يا رويلي لو شامي ليلى يا رويلي للدين شامي ليلى يا رويلي لو حالي ليلى بواب خلولو بتفتح شامي ليلى يا رويلي لو واني الليلة لبحت معي ليل الريح الشامي ليلى يا رويلي لو يا سيدي روي دور ليلي حلال حبيبي لابا يا رويلي لو
Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen.
Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen. Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen.
Och vi har odlat jorden.
Och vi har odlat jorden.
Och vi har skördat vetet.
Och vi har skördat vetet.
Vi har plockat citronerna.
Och vi har plockat citronerna.
Och pressat oliverna.
Och pressat oliverna.
Och hela världen känner till vår jord.
Och hela världen känner till vår jord. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve, leve, Vive Palestina och krossa sionismen. Vive Palestina och krossa sionismen. Och vi har kastat stenar på. Och vi har kastat stenar på. Soldater och poliser. Soldater och poliser. Och vi har skjutit raketer. Och vi har skjutit raketer. Mot våra fiender. Mot våra fiender. Och hela världen känner till vår kamp. Och hela världen känner till vår kamp. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen. Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen. Och vi ska befria vårt land. Och vi ska befria vårt land. Från imperialismen. Från imperialismen. Och vi ska bygga upp vårt land. Och vi ska bygga upp vårt land. Till socialismen. Till socialismen. Och hela världen kommer att bevittna. Och hela världen kommer att bevittna. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen. 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 Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen.
يا طالعين عيني للجبل يا مول المنقذين النار بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح ما بدي منك لكم خلعة ولا لا 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 بدي زنار بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح ما بدي منك لكم خلعة ولا لا 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 بدي ملبوس بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح إلا غزالي الذي جواني لكم محبوس بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح إلا غزالي الذي جواني لكم ميدوم بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح يا طالعين عيني للجبل يا مول المنقذين النار بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح يا طالعين عيني للجبل يا مول المنقذين النار بين اليمن يمن عيني للهنا يا روح يما مويلي الهوى يما مويلي يما مويلي الهوى يما مويلي ضرب الخناجر ولا حكم الندل فيا يما ويلي الهوى يما ويلي يما ويلي الهوى يما ويلي ضرب الخناجر ولا حكم الندل فيا ومشيت تحت الشتاء والشتاء رواني ومشيت تحت الشتاء والشتاء رواني والصيف لما أتى ولع من نيراني بقى عمر فدا ندر للحرية نادر للحرية يما ويل الهوى يما ويلي يما ويل الهوى يما ويلي ضرب الخناجر ولا حكم الندل فيا ضرب الخناجر ولا حكم الندل فيا يما ويل الهوى
ينقذ في سلاحف بحرية يقتل حيوانات بشرية تلك قضية وتلك قضية كيف تكون ملاكا أبيض يبقى ضميرك نص ضمير تنصف حركات الحرية وتنصف حركات التحرير وتوزع عطفك وحنانك عالمقتول حسب الجنسية وتلك قضية وتلك قضية كيف تكون إنسانا راقي ومطابق للاشتراطات كل كلامك لابس واقي وبتحضن كل الشجرات بتقول عالبواب الحارس جنبك جيش بيد مدارس وأما بتقفش نفسك لابس دم تقول الكل ضحية وتلك قضية وتلك قضية كيف أصدق هذا العالم لما بيحكي عن الإنسان شايف أم بتبكي ضناء علشان مات في الغار جعان ويساوي المقتول باليد بشرف ونزاهة وحيادة وتلك قضية.
Hi. Am I loud? Can I be heard? Hi. Can I please ask? Can I please have people back to their seats? We're about to start the paneling questions. Louder. Wow, you told me all the way to the top. Hello. Am I heard? Yeah, I'm good. Hi. Can I please ask people to go back to their seats, as well as if you have QR codes or last-minute questions, please submit them to our panelists.
مش تبع الكرة الأرضية وتلك قضية وتلك قضية كيف تعيش في سجن واسع سنسينا ومن نار ورماد وتقوم من تحت الأنقاض تشعل في راب القاتل تجمع أشلاك وتاتي وتوري الدنيا الكذابة كيف يسير قانون الغاب من أين طريق الحرية ومن أين توتا الدباب مش فارق العالم يتكلم موت حر وما تعيش مسلم تلم جيل ورا جيل يتعلم كيف يعيش ويموت كل قضية بننادي على عالم مين علشان يستنكر ويهدين بين كما شئت فايدا لما يجري جوا السلخان مش هتخف بارود الدم ولا قادرة تركب صباح تلك قضية هذا
يا طالعين عين الجبل يا مول الموقدين النار بين اليمن يمن عين الهنا يا روح ما
All right. At 45, so 3 minutes. All right, we go. Hi. Hello. Hi, how are you? Thank you. Toilet. Oh, sorry. Thank you guys so much for coming. So, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, it is my privilege to introduce two remarkable individuals who have dedicated their lives to advancing justice, equality, Dr. Nadia Abu Zahra and Prakash Diyar. Nadia Abu Zahra is a multilingual scholar activist who spans multiple spheres of colonial and neo-colonial conflicts. Fluent in 5 languages, Dr. Abu Zahra's expertise lies in advocating for freedom of movement, community mobilization, and the resistance against systemic oppression. As the former joint chair of women's studies at the University of Ottawa and Carleton University, she has been a trailblazer in promoting gender equality and social justice. Dr. Abu Zahra's contributions extend beyond academia. She's actively involved in initiatives such as Community Mobilization in Crisis Project and the Feminist Foreign Policy Working Group. Recognized for her outstanding achievements, Dr. Abu Zahra has received prestigious awards, including the Ottawa U Award for Activities in Media and in the Community. And joining Dr. Abu Zahra is Prakash Diyar, a champion in human rights and equality. Born in South Africa to 3rd-generation indentured laborers of Indian descent, Prakash's journey is one of resilience and determination. The first in his family to attend university and become a lawyer, Prakash has fought tirelessly against injustice, particularly during the era of apartheid. He has won significant cases, including systemic racial discrimination suits and Indian residential school class action. Prakash's commitment extends to training over 2,000 Department of Justice lawyers and paralegals on Indigenous reconciliation and systemic discrimination. His efforts have been recognized with prestigious awards, including Human Rights Award from the Law Society of Ontario and the Diversity Award from the South Asian Bar Association, SABA, in Toronto. Together, Dr. Nadia Abu Zahra and Prakash Diyar embody the spirit of activism, advocacy. Their dedication to promoting equality, justice, and human rights serves as an inspiration for us all. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panel. All right. So the questions tonight were presented by our whole group. We worked really hard to give you the most diverse cross-section of topics, intersectionalities and themes to better educate and to better, I guess, inspire people, individuals who leave here to be motivated, filled with compassion and empathy in regards to the subject matter we've seen tonight. So one of the first questions given the way our turnout is today, I wanted to start with the international community. The complicity of the international community is evident in both cases with South Africa and Palestine. How do you interpret the role and stances of the international community in enabling apartheid and supporting the Israeli occupation through diplomatic, military, and economic means? So I'll leave the floor to everyone to answer first.
The international community has a choice. And at any time, the international community has a choice. They have a choice right now, they'll have a choice a year from now, and they had a choice 20 years ago. The plan for what's happening now was presented to a series of Palestinians, including myself, 20 years ago. So no one can say no one knew. Everyone knew. Anyone who knew anything about the situation. I was a student at the time and I knew. So no one can say they didn't know. The international community had a choice 20 years ago, and they have a choice today. The International Court of Justice intervened 20 years ago, and the International Court of Justice intervened today. So the international community has had this choice 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, 80 years. Since 1880, the international community has had a choice. And the international community is not monolithic. But if you're talking about the states around the world that have given almost unconditional backing to what's happening at the moment and what has been happening for decades on end, because there is a pattern. The quotations we have today are nearly the same as the quotations we have from the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s and 1960s and so on. They are not new. The concept presented in the film of transfer is not new. It's an old concept. In fact, the film avoided the word transfer because the word transfer in Hebrew was used for something very different, very sinister. It was used for a deal between Zionists and Nazis. And that same word is being used today and has been used for decades. And the international community that are in line with whatever is happening at the moment are deaf, blind, and dumb, or in complete agreement with their eyes and ears wide open. And I think it's the latter, because if I could know as a student 20 years ago, they could know as states 40 years ago and more. So it's a choice. Now, there are states for whom this choice is also equally clear that justice needs to be done, that lives need to be saved. That choice has always been there, and there are many states, and I don't want to ignore them, that have chosen that. And they give us the example. They show us that it is not difficult to be Ireland, to be Cuba in 1948, to be. There are many states that have stood in allyship, and I do not wish to ignore the nations around the world that are not recognized at the moment by the United Nations, but that we as Palestinians should recognize today. First Nations have said as one that they stand against genocide, against what is happening today. And I think that that is important not to neglect. The international community is not monolithic in support for Zionism and in support for genocide at the moment. But at the same time, there are profits to be made off weapons sales. And to the credit of those who are bringing court cases against states who are making profits off of genocide, there are court cases now against those states. Yeah.
I think the West, in particular, international community, they've made a choice. There's no question about it. There are no guesses for what their choice is. They are not only turning a blind eye, they are actually complicit in what is happening. They are giving a blank check to what is happening and what has happened. So there's no two bones about that. This, in particular, the South African case at the ICJ, has only exposed the hypocrisy and the double standards, especially at the same time that you see what is going on in Ukraine and all of the statements that go in connection with what is happening in Ukraine, and then complete silence on atrocities that are so much worse than what's happening. Of course, the two situations are completely different. It's two countries going at each other. In Palestine, you have an occupier who is oppressing its people. So, the question is, in terms of for me at least, in the international community, what can we do to change that narrative, right? Because we know the choice has been made. And I think the global south, so to say, the majority of the population of the world know what is truth, they know what is justice, and they know what is fairness. The West, when I say about hypocrisy and double standards, they talk about international humanitarian law. They talk about democracy. They talk about the rule of law. But when it comes to the practice of those slogans, I call it slogans because it means nothing to them. They are so selective. The rule of law requires that the same set of rules must apply to all equally. No matter how powerful the country may be or not, the rules, they also throw in that, the rules-based order. I mean, what BS, right? What BS? Especially from people here in North America, United States and Canada included. It's nauseating to hear them talk about human rights and the rule of law. And they talk about it unashamedly. So what do? You know, having grown up, born and raised in South Africa, we had the world, I mean, there's, I think all of you know, those of you who are following the issues, the United States in particular, United Kingdom in particular, and Germany in particular were the biggest friends and supporters of apartheid South Africa, right? In terms of trade, blocking of sanctions, divestments, they were the biggest supporters of apartheid South Africa. So what changed? What happened? Well, it is each one of us individually and each one of us collectively in those countries and worldwide. There were demonstrations and the call for divestments and sanctions. It is the people on the ground that necessitated a change in the policy. And this didn't happen overnight, of course. As the movie, it started in the late 50s, more since March the 21st, 1960. That was when Mr. Tladi talked about the Sharpeville massacre. It was a peaceful demonstration against oppressive past laws that restricted people's movement. It was a peaceful demonstration, unarmed people who were massacred, they were mowed down, and the world was outraged. But it took us since early 1960 to 1994 when we first got our first. And as one of the speakers on the movie also said, in terms of Palestine, we are way ahead. We have the momentum right now. That momentum cannot be stopped. We need to push ahead. We're going to get a lot of vetoes still and a lot of propaganda still. But you know what? People are not stupid. You can only fool so many people so much of the time, right? And people around the world are getting it. People in Germany get it. People in the UK get it. People in the US get it. People in Canada get it. And it's up to us to make the change. So there's much more to say, Mona Lisa, but in a nutshell, you know, that's what I think about. I think that this whole issue has just exposed. I mean, we knew where the values of the West in particular. I mean, their reaction is shameless. It is absolutely shameless. I mean, sometimes I don't know what words to use. I can't figure out in my limited vocabulary, you know, how shameful, in particular, some of these countries. Where is the humanity? Never mind anything else. Only justification, of course, is you think Palestinians are not humans, so that's fine. You can do what you want to, right? Yeah. That is the only justification. Because on what other grounds can you really, as an independent, objective observer, how can you, with a straight face, go to the United Nations General Security Council and veto? No, you're going to jeopardize negotiations. What negotiations? For what? You've been trying to hoodwink Palestinians for generations, for decades. And they think we're stupid, right? That's what they think. All of us are stupid.
I don't think they think we're stupid. I think it's the same exact rhetoric that happened with like older generations is repeating itself. That, oh, these people are just as gullible as their parents are. These people are gullible as their ancestors are, not realizing that positions of displacement for Palestinians in diaspora is actually contributed to, I think, such a a rise of academics, free thinkers, people who are educated, artists, artisanals, musicians, will contribute to the liberation of Palestine. And you're seeing it 20 years later after watching what has happened 20 years ago to us in general. Which brings me to my next question, because you're talking about social media. Currently, social media platforms provide daily personal narratives of Palestinians, which you were talking about, I believe as you, Professor Nadia. And the cruelty of the occupation army, how significant are these individual experiences in understanding the broader impact of apartheid and the complexities of resistance and survival? How would you respond to those who deny the validity of people's ability to live and movement, and denying that Palestinians are experiencing apartheid?
Sorry, I thought you were asking.
Oh, it was for either party.
Yeah.
Either.
Sorry.
It's a general comment.
Yes.
I mean, it's called gaslighting. It's pretty obvious that, we can see, we might be far away, but we can see, and we can see people's humanity, and we can see what's happening. And to be lied to over and over, to be lied to not only about things that happen half a world away, but to be lied to about what happens in Toronto. I mean, as if people in Ottawa have never been to Toronto, as if people in Ottawa don't know what's happening in Toronto, to be lied to over and over again, as if someone's trying to convince us that the sky is green.
And analyzes the media. Like, you have to look at the media's influences on what projects they're promoting, what projects they're not reporting. And a lot of times it doesn't highlight the current conflicts going on, the current violence being enacted on Palestinians. And a lot of us are here for this specific reason. I mean, social media is efficient, but not as much as, I guess, communicating word of mouth, connecting, going to panels and film screenings. And it's the narrative framing and the shaping of public perception in regards to apartheid in Palestine, that it's not framed in a lens of apartheid. It's framed as us versus them. And that's always been a narrative to create division between any groups. And you saw that with people not acknowledging Christian Palestinians or Palestinians of any other religious background or ethnic background. If you're a Palestinian, you're either Muslim, there isn't any diversity within it. And the media has continuously highlighted it over the last 5 months, that there are even individuals like members of the Knesset, like, we don't have any Christian Palestinians. And half the world is outraged. What do you mean there's any Christian Palestinians? But yeah. So the question was analyzing the role of media representation and the narrative around Palestine. What do you say to that?
I mean, what I said about the Western countries apply equally to the Western media. I mean, as simple as that. They are the mouthpieces of these Western so-called leaders, right? And their mission or their vision for what they see for Israel on the one hand, or against Palestine on the other hand. It is sad, but the level of journalism, if I could call it journalism at all, because journalism is supposed to be objectively reporting, but that's not what happens. I mean, you see the blatant discrepancy between how they would report on something on Ukraine and then something they would report on Palestine casualties, right? I mean, the language they use is so blatant. I mean, this unfortunate 6-year-old kid who was a sole survivor in this bomb, the car in which she was traveling was bombed. And she was a sole survivor, and she called, for help. And when they cleared the clearance and all of that, and when the ambulance arrived, even the ambulance was bombed. And how does the media report that? She was found killed. But she was murdered. They don't say that. She was murdered in cold blood. So, I mean, I think over the decades, the level, I mean, of media and the objectivity of media, in my respectful view, has declined substantially. I was a student in the 70s, and I was practicing in South Africa in the 80s in the human rights area. And I can say from my own experience, because we were involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, and I was involved in a very high-profile political case in which 6 young blacks, 5 young black men and 1 young black woman were wrongly convicted and sentenced to death for political reasons. I mentioned that only for the fact that I could rely on the media at that time to objectively look at all the facts, look at the law, and report it. And they became an ally for me because they were able to accurately reflect and report to the international press, to the international community, so much so that it helped me mobilize the international community and galvanize the support. So much so, and you may not believe this, but it's true. Some of you may know, Brian Mulroney was the prime minister at this time in the mid-80s. He was quite an anti-apartheid prime minister, if I may call it that. In the Commonwealth of Nations, Margaret Thatcher was completely opposed to any sanctions against South Africa because, you know, Reagan for the same reasons. Yeah, Reagan for the same reason. Reagan was the prime. But you know, the journalists helped me so much in exposing the injustice of this case I was talking about. And the people on the ground, and that's what I was trying to refer to earlier, that each one of us individually and collectively, our protest is not in vain. I mean, even in Canada, the slightest so shift, and then they go back to, you know, the right to self-defense nonsense. You know, it is not in vain. Whatever we are doing is not in vain. Sometimes we cannot see the results immediately, and it's going to be a long term, but don't give up the fight. Coming back to my point, sorry. I was able to get the media to expose the injustice of 6 people going to be sacrificed. They were going to be hung by the neck until they were dead for political reasons, not for legal reasons, because they had committed no crime. But they wanted to set an example. There was a state of emergency. The country was we were making the country ungovernable because we were not going to cooperate with the state. There was a complete local resistance in South Africa. But here's the point. Together with the international community's support, the sanctions, everything else combined, we would not have seen 1994 come to fruition without the internal resistance, together with the international help. But the journalists played an important part in that. But now, unfortunately, they're owned by multi-billionaires or conglomerates that have political, you know, journalism is not what it used to be. Thank God for Al Jazeera, by the way, you know. Yes. And thank God for all of these journalists who became a journalist overnight in exposing what is happening. I mean, can you believe CTV and CBC showing us any of that? No. CBC, NBC, ABC.
I was going to say that a lot of the content that I consume was through Al Jazeera, but you have like social media apps like Instagram,
Sure.
TikTok, or even shared through WhatsApp. Is that the network community is a lot more grassroots in exchanging, I think, media and information. Like social media information has really proven to be such a beneficial segue in the way we change information or it's conveyed.
Yeah, just make Mona Lisa, just one more point on that.
Go ahead.
I mean, there are over 100 or 150 journalists killed. I mean, they are targeted even before October the 7th, right? Or yes, me?
Say like 100 and I think 20.
They targeted snipers.
Sorry.
Not you know, collateral. They are being targeted because they don't want us to see what's happening there.
Collateral over here, and they let sympathies that these people were collateral because in war, when it's like a project that's from Turtle Island, it's warranted, it's necessary, it's needed to kind of police individuals. Very paternalistic as a I guess Turtle Island being.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's important to look at the media that are the exception Years ago, it was indie media. Today, it's the Punch Up Collective, Breach, Passage, The Intercept, individuals like Dimitri Lascaris and Aaron Mate. Those are all people that are very close, that are nearby, that are actually community supported. So you may wish to look to them and to support them and to keep them going. In French, I'll remember it in a moment, but there's a fantastic new, it's been around for about 5 years, new piece of media that's very, very remarkable and publishing in multiple media. So when I remember that one, I'll let you know. The individual who leads it is named Leila Savage. And the media is part of the struggle. I mean, I think the journalist for CBC was named Brishti Basu, who wrote a journal article about all the people who had been fired across Turtle Island, the northern part in Canada, who'd been fired for simply saying, we think that no more people should be killed in Palestine and Israel. And that's all they were saying. And so she wrote an article. These are the people who have lost their positions across Turtle Island. And then her next tweet was, CBC has terminated my contract early. And so, the media is a struggle. It is a site for struggle. Academia is a site for struggle. The government is a site for struggle. We see in the United States, staffers inside the government. So staffers, people whose salaries are paid by the government and who are the government, and they're standing up and they're saying, we don't support what the government is doing. The government is not representing the people. And so even the government itself is a site for struggle. The media is a site for struggle. So everything we can do in each of these spheres will knock on the other spheres. So when the media is silenced, that's going to have a detrimental effect on, believe it or not, healthcare. That's going to have a detrimental effect elsewhere and elsewhere and elsewhere, which is why actually, no matter what people's position is on what Canada as a settler state's foreign policy should be toward Palestine, Israel, people should also be recognizing that this is not something that confines itself. I was deeply disturbed after doing intensive research in the early 2000s to attend a conference in the United States, also attended by former classmates of mine who I'd gone to university previously with here in Toronto specifically. So they were giving presentations on Nexus and on the border between Canada and the United States, and on the technologies that were being used, and on the forms of discrimination that were taking place. And I was so deeply disturbed. I found that more disturbing because I had thought that was not happening. And I said to them after their presentation, you and I had the same presentations. I presented on Palestine and you presented on Turtle Island. Same presentations, same technologies, same practices. So this is actually an issue that everyone really needs to care about. If there is silencing in Palestine, tomorrow that silencing is in Ottawa. And it's not tomorrow anymore. Yeah.
I was going to be like, what strategies need to be followed for challenging biases? But clearly you gave us those strategies. So let's talk about, I think, one of the more talked about but sensitive topics is the context of resistance, and certain factors contribute to significantly to the success of resistances in South Africa and eventually dismantling apartheid. What are the promising success factors for resistance in Palestine? How do you envision the future, and what type of support do you think that would garner from the international community, and how would you see that unfolding?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to tell Palestinians what their form of resistance ought to be.
I'm talking about inspiration.
Inspirational, yeah. I mean, my answer would be all forms of resistance.
Okay.
No exclusions, We talk about people who are being oppressed and what is their resistance modes. Why don't we talk about the oppressor and the atrocities they've been committing for such a long time? and getting away with it. Complete impunity, complete.
Overhaul the system.
Yeah, yeah. So, you can only drive people to a corner for so long. And with the limited resources that they have, they are entitled to their own self-determination, their own self-government, their own self-dignity, in whatever form of resistance they think is appropriate. It is up to them to decide what to do. I can only, yeah, that's your opinion. Nelson Mandela was termed a terrorist.
So, sir? Shame on you. Shame on you. I am so sorry about that. Wow. I mean, it's not like we were endorsing violence or ripping things off hinges, but all right.
Well, they like to talk about Hamas and Hamas's violence, but they never want to talk about,
Question the context of resistance wasn't in the Hamas context. I swear to you,
No.
wasn't that
No,
context.
no.
I was talking about our actions as individuals,
Yeah.
global citizens. How
Well-
do we enact different forms of resistance? And
Okay.
some people
Sorry.
are comfortable with demonstrations. Some people are comfortable with dying.
Yeah.
We
I-
all have a right to express ourselves. Sorry.
Sure. Sorry. No. I maybe misinterpreted your question, but I was going to say Nelson Mandela was termed a terrorist, and he said on his interview here, we've tried to be peaceful for as long as possible, and we only met with violence, brutal force, state violence, right?
You look at the 1 year marching of Palestinians in Gaza to the border between, I think, 2018-19, every year, every week they would go.
Yeah.
And succession, they were mowed down.
Yeah.
And that was the most peaceful form of resistance. So
Sure.
for us to change forms of resistance, really
Yeah.
just peaceful
And as I said, it's not for me to determine what their form of resistance, but I'm just saying, from my experience, being born
individuals. For the most part, they were teachers, they were children, they were parents and grandparents, they were disabled, they were all facing potential death. The soldiers who faced off to them were on a shoot to kill policy. They saw a Canadian, a doctor, a professor of medicine. What did they do with him? Does anyone know? They shot him through both legs. And he was there to do what? To distribute 3D printed turnkeys to stop the bleeding. So he tweets afterwards, a Canadian doctor, London, Ontario. He tweets afterwards, at least I know the turnkeys work. If we don't know what's happening, that's one thing. But if we know and we don't talk about it, that means people are doing these sacrifices and they're doing them in vain. And so it's so important. That film was before the Great March of Return. But for example, Jeff Halper, for whom I have immense respect, he talked about control. He talked about a prison. But I didn't hear him, and it's not his place, so I understand why, but it's our place. I didn't hear him talk about steadfastness, that people choose the prison. All of the people who are in Palestine today chose it, not because they cannot leave, but because they will not leave. And that choice is resistance. To exist is to resist. Turtle Island, the First Nations, that's their resistance, among many other forms. Don't get me wrong. I am not one to tell you what the resistance of First Nations, Métis and Inuit is or is not. But at least I recognize that that strategy of resistance, to exist is to resist. In Arabic, we call it sumud. That strategy to stay in one place, to put down roots and to say, I will not stand for injustice, but I will stand here. And I will not be moved. That strategy is resistance. And when we do not call enough attention to that kind of a strategy, they talked about Gilo, the settlement, the colony, basically on top of Beit Sahur. They didn't talk about one of the few people to be killed by the Palestinian Authority or with the coordination of the Palestinian Authority was someone who was an active, vocal pacifist. And yet he was killed defending Beit Sahur against Gilo. And we forget him. And it's important that we don't forget that when we don't see the thing happening in front of our eyes, we remember that that's still resistance. When you all do write to your members of parliament, when you do stand with what I'm about to say in a moment, that is resistance as well. It's sleepy and it's boring and it's thankless, but it has an effect. And as you said, sometimes we don't see that. We may not see it in our lifetimes, but we have the obligation to do that as human beings, not as someone who is, and this is a terrible negative media label, and you may disagree with me, but the label of pro-Palestine. Are people pro-Palestine or are they pro-justice? If Palestine stands up and does everything wrong, if Palestine commits genocide, will everyone who is standing there labeled as pro-Palestine be pro-Palestine? I think not. People are standing up because they are pro-justice. And so we know why we're doing what we're doing. I wanted to mention that over the coming 3 days, and you might mention this also, I imagine the organizers are part of this as well, there will be, I'm not sure what to call it, but people will be at O'Connor and Wellington. To my knowledge, I'm not an organizer, but I believe that this is very important. These are families of people who wish to seek refuge in Canada, and they are going to be essentially present from the morning till the sun goes down at O'Connor and Wellington for 3 days, starting, if I'm not mistaken, tomorrow. 9 to 5, starting tomorrow for 3 days. So pass by O'Connor and Wellington and show them some resistance. And to the men who left, you know, maybe he might care about the families. And maybe we all in this room care. And all of those of you on Zoom, kudos. This is not a short Zoom call.
It's very dense material.
Very dense material in a long period of time. Maybe you can take place And you can bring your family to stand with these families to say, this is the least that Canada could do, is to host these people who desperately need refuge.
Thank you so much. Any additional comments?
No, I mean, what was most shocking about the movie we just watched, right? I mean, I've lived through it, but Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was very kind to me personally in my effort to save my 6 clients, and in the book that I wrote, he was very kind to give me a beautiful blurb. Him, as well as many others, including in this movie that we just watched, that as bad as apartheid was in South Africa, it is infinitely worse in Palestine.
It's like it was.
It was worse, right? But here's the message I want to give. We fought very hard. I mean, for our struggle for freedom. Many of us were jailed. I was jailed as well, without charge, of course, tortured. They didn't want you to speak the truth or represent political prisoners who expose the injustice, right? And we fought very hard. And I was lucky. I wasn't kept for too long. Some other people were not that lucky. They were assassinated. 2 people close to me were assassinated. Hence the reason I had to leave the country 35 years ago. But all this to say that even people like us who were really involved in our struggle for freedom, we didn't think that the freedom was around the corner. It wasn't just going to come, soon enough for us. We thought maybe not in our lifetime, but it was the momentum that was gathered over a period of time, over a period of decades, that culminated to such an extent that the international community, including US, UK, and Germany, could no longer protect apartheid South Africa. They had no choice. So much so that freedom came to us even when we thought it wasn't going to happen so soon. So my message is, the momentum is there. Let us not lose that momentum. And we are on the right side of justice. And as Professor Nadia said, I'm not necessarily pro-Palestinian, but I am pro-justice. I am pro-fairness, pro-rule of law, because that's my training, right? And I'm trying to use my platform in a limited way that I can to expose those countries that are having double standards so blatantly and so unashamedly. I mean, when you hear the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs talk about Ukraine, great. Why don't you apply the same thing to the Palestinians who have a better cause? Because they've been, anyway.
No, it's fine. No. I was. Thank you so much. So that concludes the mic questioning portion.
Okay.
So these are the ones that were generously provided by our patrons, our lovely patient patrons. The first one that I found, which actually kind of talks about the context of allyship and working together, is it's clear that, and this is from the crowd, it's clear that allyship advances our collective connected causes. What might allyship with First Nation, Indigenous Canadians look like in mutual advancement?
Yeah. I think our struggle, I think our struggles are very common, right? Indigenous people's struggles. It's about land and land theft in the main, and it's about domination of one group over another.
Continuous, also the continuous displacement or transfer. Settlers needed land in Turtle Island.
Exactly. So it's the same story. It's a modern day colonization compared to colonization hundreds of years ago. But the principle is the same: land theft, and resources, and it's about domination, and it's about power, and it's about white supremacy as well, right? So that's in a nutshell, right? Over to you, Prof.
The first step, I think, is if you're talking about allyship with First Nations, Métis and Inuit, I think it's important to first recognize our positioning in that respect. And I think it's easy to say that Palestinians are indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit are indigenous, and therefore there's allyship. But I think it's also important to recognize the context of people being settlers here. And so, the first step for settlers in allyship is to advocate an end to present colonialism. We're looking at the phasing out of gas vehicles in Ontario. What does that have to do with allyship? Nothing, right? But where are the materials for the batteries of these future electric vehicles coming from? They're coming from the Ring of Fire. And what do the First Nations think of the Ring of Fire? They think, no way, Jose, don't unearth these kinds of things. We have paid with our lives. This is what First Nations are saying. Do not dump nuclear waste in the Ottawa River. Chalk River is going to be a nuclear dump site for private sector firm to profit from this. The protest about that is also coming up very soon. So this is allyship. This is here and now and today. This isn't the 1500s. This is today. So it's important to recognize what are those struggles right here, right now, and work on those at the same time as working on trying to end colonialism, not only here, but also in Palestine. And it's overwhelming. And so everyone bites off what they can chew, and everyone does what they do best. I think it's beautiful when teachers try to do something related to education. And it's beautiful when people who are artists do something related to art or film related to film. So I think that we all do different things differently, but the allyship is definitely possible.
Different forms of resistance.
That's right. Right.
Right. So I have another one would be, oh yes. So this adds to the follow-up question is, how can the Palestinian liberation movement work together to exercise more leverage or visibility? Often the person asking the question feels that there are many groups working in single, alone. No.
Yeah.
Silo, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's for the Palestinian people to determine, who's going to be representing. If I understood your question correctly, the PLO.
Palestinian liberation movement
Oh, the movement.
Work together to exercise more of leverage or visibility.
Yeah.
Often feel that there are many groups working in silos.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll talk from my own experience in South Africa as well. We had a few different groups, all different strategies, tactics, but all wanted to, fight the apartheid system. And so and of course, the African National Congress, which Mandela was, the leader and was jailed, and he was on Robben Island for many years. They were a banned organization, banned by the South African government. So you couldn't espouse the aims and objects of a banned organization, because then you would become, foul to the law and you could be jailed. So what we decided to do is to have what we call the United Democratic Movement, where we had over 700 organizations, churches, women's groups, student groups, university students, trade unions, about an umbrella of about 700 organizations. We came on a broad principles of democracy and of freedom, and we came together under one roof called the UDF in 1983. And that helped us move forward in a much quicker and much better and effective way. We had some differences but the overall goal was to fight for our freedom for everyone. So it's important that groups that are within the Palestinian movements try and work together. But I don't know. I don't know too much about the regions and the differences, but those can be overcome. But it's important. But the one thing I'll warn against is that the West like to impose their own people, their own leadership, and their own organizations. We had a word for that in South Africa. Those were sellouts. Okay, We used to call them sellouts, but it's the people's choices who represents them, you know. But
I would speak very specifically toward not the global movement, but for instance, Ottawa working within a global context. And I'm not an expert on some of this and how to work united. And I've asked colleagues, people like the people you saw in the film, and one very good answer was, we need everyone, and we need everybody's strategies and different strategies working at the same time. At the time I was asking, particularly with respect to legal challenges, I was like, do you use the state court or the international court or neither, and you raise awareness against both courts, or what is it that you do? And the person's answer was, you need all of those strategies at the same time, taking different approaches to the same problem and recognizing one another's work and working in tandem, not doing the same thing, but somehow working toward the same aim at the end. The other thing I would say as a golden rule is to stand for one another. If, for instance, someone would attack you verbally, my colleague, the advocate Prakash Diyar, then I would say I was seated next to Mr. Diyar, and I would say that everything that I heard was spoken with reason, from lived experience, and very helpful. And I think we need to do that for everyone with whom we work. And if not, then we follow that golden rule that in private, we say wuss, 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 wuss. But I have nothing to say to you in private. I will do it publicly.
Yeah.
But, you know, if we wish to differ, then we do so. And we do so in ways that are respectful to people's dignity and recognizing their good intentions. Those are the golden rules, I'd say.
Yeah.
I know we have a couple of
Sure.
questions I have to ask. I was going to ask which is probably the most popular question I think a lot of us are moving towards, the BDS movement. So are there any avenues available for us in Ottawa to get more involved in BDS efforts?
Pensions.
Pension
Pensions are
funds.
so enormous. Pensions are small states. Pensions are so large that when I studied at the University of Oxford, half the department was studying, well, not half the department, but a significant number of students, as well as the chair of the department I was studying, were studying pensions. And they were studying the role of investment firms in private public sector partnerships, such as the 407 in Ontario that runs through Toronto. It's a highway. And so pension funds are these enormous decision makers. They master and control enormous numbers of funds, amounts of funds. And when they divest, it is big, big, big. And who does not have a pension? I mean, I'm sure the 12-year-olds in the room might not be saying we have pensions, but adults generally have pensions. So one of the first points of access for boycott, divestment, and sanctions is to be like, where is my pension invested? Is it invested in any of these firms? And to start with that, I think that there's a group called World Beyond War. They've assembled a list of weapons companies. So, you know, not soda companies, not t-shirt companies, but weapons manufacturers. And they have said these are companies that are clearly about killing. You know, there's no wishy-washy here. There's no, oh, this could be taken as identity wars. No, no, no. This is quite clear. These manufacture items for hurting human beings. And so take a look at that list, World Beyond War, I think it is, at their weapons boycott suggestions. And if the world had fewer weapons, that's a good thing for everyone, not only one location.
Sure. Just a quick addition to that would be, I think banks, financial institutions, universities, you know, I remember as a young student, there was a popular boycott of a company. I think I don't know if the name's changed. It used to be called Wilson Roundtrees. They used to make candy and chocolates, right? But it was very effective. You know, just a symbolic nature of a boycott of something like that has a ripple effect, you know, of So, it's everything. But financially and financial institutions and pension funds especially, very big, big investors. So, it's all in sundry.
Thank you so much. That's
Yeah.
the evening's been so lovely. Do you have any
Thank you.
final concluding remarks?
No,
to
no.
patrons? Any comment?
Well, one last thing I'll say is, I wish, people will be angry like the gentleman was at what is happening on the ground more than what any speaker can say.
We're talking about global solidarity movement.
Yeah.
That's not the kind of
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's amazing that you would watch a film like this, and if you understood what was being said, and then react the way you react, it's shocking, but it's true. And unfortunately, there are many like that, But we should be on our guard, and I may need an escort to my car.
We'll send a fleet. An armored vehicle. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
If you are interested in knowing more specifically about the topic of the film, if those details are not too traumatic or in fact something you wish to know more about, I have the unfortunate circumstance of having co-authored a book on the subject. It's called Unfree in Palestine, and I brought with me 14 copies. It sells on Amazon for 48 and the local bookstore for 57. And I don't mean to undermine the local bookstore, but they were unavailable to join us today. So I brought the copies that I pay for at cost. I'm suggesting $40. You don't have to buy one. Quite the opposite. It helps me because I had to order them from England and it was a real pain. But if you are interested in this, it was something that I researched for years with my co-author, Ada Kay, who's since passed away. And so it was unpleasant to research and it was unpleasant to write, but it's the truth. And it was a history that dated from the 1500s to the present in terms of when they talk about decitizenization, that was Naim Gina's word. In the book, it's called denationalization. In giving everyone an identity number that's all within the population registry controlled by the Israeli Ministry of Interior, that's a chapter in the book. The ID cards, that's a chapter in the book. The people in the film were people I interviewed. They're people I studied with. You saw Sasha Polakos-Saransky talking about the connections between apartheid South Africa and Israel at the time. He and I were students in the exact same cohort. So that film told almost the story of my research, which essentially became the story of my life for years. So if you want a continuation, the book is available. As I said, I brought 14 copies. They'll be on a table that had food. And I was going to tell them, I don't know how I was going to, hey, Dr. Nadia's books are in the corner there, enriching the subject matter. It's an old book, as old as the film.
Yeah, the best type of books are the old ones.
But it's unfortunately more true today than ever.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I don't have like an e-transfer account. And so I just suggested cash. But if you want to sort of, I don't know, if you want to write an IOU or something, you can do that. But you're welcome to have them. And they're also available, if you wish, again, called Unfree in Palestine at Octopus Books, which is a shop that you should just have on your list for your holiday shopping and gift shopping. It's an excellent shop.
Mona Lisa, just one thing. I'm just wondering, this is more of a comment or a question. How can this movie be made available to the masses?
That's actually one of the questions that I was going to ask. I'm so sorry. It's not me.
I read your mind.
This video is actually like, we had streamed it through Cinema Politica, which is the only way we could actually show it to lovely, lovely individuals. However, if you were to go to YouTube, they do have this video readily and available for you to share with your friends, with whoever needs it. This information is easily accessible. So a lot of the videos you do see, the one we had today, is available on YouTube. That's, I think, Journeyman Cameraman. It's a Cameraman Journey something. Sorry, don't really look at it. But yeah, if anyone would like that resource, get in contact with one of our volunteers or myself, and we will gladly provide you with the link if today wasn't sufficient enough.
Yeah.
All right.
And share the link with anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have to, but please, thank you guys for coming. Yeah, we do have a couple of tokens of appreciation for our, I'm so sorry. Yeah. The lovely bracelets were done by our Camilla over here to give the panelists. Yeah. And our.
You?
Well,
You want to put it on for me?
There's, like to use those? Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah, of
so
course.
much. That was
Whatever
beautiful.
Here, please, sir. This as
Thank you
well.
for
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Oh, no, please stay. I think we might take some pictures together.
yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, we're good. Yeah. Yes, please just come up. We can have for all of you. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Yeah. Do you have any last minute things to say? We good? All right. Thank you so much, ironically. We'd like to thank APAC. We'd like to thank the South African Embassy. We'd like to thank, I can't talk anymore. Dr. Prakash, Dr. Prakash, Professor Nadia, for being here. Very exciting evening, and we appreciate the turnouts. Really, thank you. I don't know what else to say. I'm so just gratefully. Jeez. Thank you. Yes, of course, sir. Yeah. I mean, if we're gonna take a couple of more photos of who, sir? Yeah. Sorry. Sorry.
Recording stopped.
And you just mentioned that. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna take a picture of you guys together. Sorry. So I just want to take a picture of all you guys together, if that's all right. So I haven't taken it. Yeah, Praise saying hi to his friends. I'm so sorry. How'd I do?
Amazing. That's good.
Really?
I have a